So, John, what's your thoughts on the Humber Street development?
Well, my thoughts are many and varied. In fact, I think it's a really amazing project for the city. It's an area which really has been almost derelict for the past 10 years or so. And many people know that about 5 years ago, all of the businesses that traded in fruit and vegetables and flowers down that street, what was in fact the traditional fruit market of the city, moved out to a new development out on the edge of the city, which left all of those buildings down there available for other uses. And I think as a civic society, one of the fears that we had for a long period of time was in fact that it would be comprehensively redeveloped. In other words, the old buildings would be demolished. And of course that would be a great shame. And I think that fortunately that's has not been the case and is not going to be the case. And what we've been able to see over the last 5 years probably is in fact a kind of organic re-establishment of the area as a very quirky arts and music venue for the city. And I think this has been recognised by the City Council as a great opportunity for the city to expand its offering both to its local population and indeed as an attraction to people from outside the city and indeed from Europe as well. And I think looking at the way things are being planned, to see it as a complementary part of that area, complementary to the marina itself, which is a great area, complementary to the whole big spaces there which are available for festivals such as the Heritage Open Days project that I'm involved with, but perhaps more importantly to the Freedom Festival, which involves hundreds of thousands of people and needs lots of big spaces. So what we've got here is a great opportunity. In fact, a few years ago I visited Buenos Aires in Argentina, and there's an area down there called La Boca, and it reminds you, Humber Street reminds you of that area. This area, La Boca, which in fact means the mouth, apparently in Spanish, they say, this was established 100 or more years ago when immigrants from Europe first arrived, and they got nothing, but what they did manage to do was scrounge sheets of corrugated iron and paint from ships that were coming in and out of the port, and they built this almost like a village which is a complete shambles, but in fact it's all brightly painted and it's established itself as the arts and quirky entertainment eating area of the city. And I certainly think that there are many parallels between this whole part of our city, this quirky Humber Street, and what's gone on very successfully in Buenos Aires as a huge tourist attraction. It's the must-see place when you go there, and I think Humber Street could be very similar for us in this city.
You know, we've heard when we've been doing some research that some historians don't want the stables and historic warehouses touching. Can you expand more on this? Why don't the Civic Society want these to be demolished or redeveloped?
Well, I think the Civic Society haven't said that as such. I think what we want to see in particular is the maintenance of the facades of Humber Street, and we've got to be conscious of the fact that this redevelopment, this regeneration, it's not a redevelopment, it's a regeneration, it's a rebirth of this area, a renaissance of the area. It can only take place if the buildings which constitute it are in fact economically viable. It's no use having nice looking buildings if nobody can find a use for them or afford a use for them. And so one of the inevitabilities is that if you look at the buildings individually, whatever they were designed for in the first place, that changed over the years, so that each of them in fact are very long, deep and narrow buildings, and in many cases of course they were fruit warehouses, which was fine, but over the years particularly these warehouses at the back have fallen into a great state of decay. In any case, something had to be done with them, and so whilst I think it would be a shame to do away with all of the depth behind, because those shapes are ideal for galleries and venues, it is inevitable that there's got to be a big sorting out of what goes on behind the facade. So we, as a civic society, want to see as much as possible of the street scene kept intact, because this is the really attractive part of this project, and feel more hopeful that what goes on behind will be done sympathetically, but will be done in a way that liberates the commercial use and therefore success of Humber Street in the future. You mentioned the stables. Now I think this is perhaps something which relates to the site of the new C4DI building, the Centre for Digital Innovation, which is now going ahead on the side of the dry dock, and this will be a huge innovative building for the city, like a starter set up for high-tech digital companies. That site contained the burnt-out remains of some old stables, and whilst one could say it would be a shame to knock such buildings down, the fact is that they were burnt out several years ago, and really nobody knew they were there. So on the one hand it's a shame for something to be knocked down that's old, but on the other hand, if it's going to, if it can't be used successfully within a new development, then perhaps that sacrifice has to be made. And undoubtedly the new C4DI building will be spectacular and a great asset to the city. One thing that has bothered me about the renovations in Humber Street, and if you go at the moment, I'm sure you've got films of it, it's just a complete mass of scaffolding. There's a particular building down there which looks like the front of a frontier town in the Wild West. It's all slatted wooden boards and it looks awful, but actually its awfulness is quite nice, and we would rather hope that that could be restored to be much the same as it looks today, even if the boards are taken off and put back again. And I think we're hopeful that that will take place.
What role will Hull Civic Society play a part in the 2017 City of Culture?
Well, I think that we certainly have played an active role in supporting the bid in the first place. I was a member of the steering group that put together the bid, albeit it's the City Council who did all the work and should be congratulated for what they achieved with other partners. We as a civic society in particular will continue to deliver our Heritage Open Days project, which we run each year in September over a period of 4 days. So that will have a significant impact on one of the weeks of the City of Culture year. We hope in that time to expand the programme. At the moment we have about 100 events of open buildings, tours, walks, presentations, and last year Hull received the National Award for Creative Thinking from the National Heritage Open Days Consortium, so that was nice to go to London and pick that up. And in fact it turns out that Hull's Heritage Open Days offering, as depicted in this glossy brochure, is one of the best in the country. The biggest one is Norwich, but we found out recently that Norwich City actually does it for the whole of Norfolk County as well. So perhaps when we analyse the numbers a bit more, it'll turn out that Hull's actually is bigger than this, and then we can all be very pleased.
How does that feel though, to be a big society, to have these open days? Do you get a large number of people every year? Does it increase?
It does. It's steadily increased, particularly over the last 5 years when we've been able to put more investment into it and develop the number of attractions. So last year we probably increased it by about 30% on the year before. We produced a much bigger brochure and we produced a lot more copies of it. Last year we had something like 60 different heritage buildings open to the public. We had about 15 local major companies open their doors for tours around their companies. We had 18 talks by experts in their field about the history of Hull and Hull's people, and we had about 20 guided walks around the old town and around the parks and some of the avenues. So it was really a very comprehensive 4-day event.
Any questions?
It's
Thank
no,
you.
no